Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Majesty 2, the Fantasy Kingdom sim for PC. Now, a while back I reviewed Majesty 1, which came out in 2001-2002, and this is the official sequel to that, not made by the same people though. The original was Infogrames and Cyberlore Studios. This is Paradox Interactive and 1C Company. Basically, they took the core Majesty gameplay and updated it to a 3D engine and put in some tweaks here and there. Now, with the move to 3D, the graphics kind of improved. And I say kind of because the original game had this kind of quirky art style where everything was all, fantasy, kind of colorful, all that kind of stuff. And that's one thing they did really well with Majesty 2. They actually kept it very colorful, very fairy tale, in feel. And the problem with that, though, is that it looks kind of like World of Warcraft. And I'm just sick of seeing stuff look like World of Warcraft. But overall, the art style works pretty well. The graphics themselves are about average for your typical, strategy game or sim kind of game, especially on a budget. The animations are okay. There's a few quirks here and there, like bowstrings don't actually pull or anything like that. But the animations work okay. The graphics work fine too. It's just that it's nothing that'll absolutely blow you away. Likewise, the sound design is pretty average for a strategy game, especially on a budget. Most of the sound effects are pretty standard. They're nothing that's terrible, but they're nothing that'll blow you away again. The voice acting is a little bit more serious than the first game, but in being more serious, it also makes it a little bit more amusing because they tend to take things a little bit more over the top than the original game because they're actually taking the voices a little bit more seriously. The wizards still do that "I'm melting" thing, but overall, the sound design works pretty well. The music is phenomenal, especially when you put it side by side with the original game. The original game had this kind of fantasy medieval feel to it, but this one actually has more of a fairy tale feel to it. So you'll kind of get the feeling of watching something like Shrek, I guess. But overall, the music is the really standout thing in the sound design because everything else is just pretty average. And some of the voices are a little annoying, but not too many of them. Now, the core gameplay from Majesty 1 is still there. You still place buildings. You still put a bunch of reward flags out. Their heroes still have minds of their own. You still research upgrades like your weapons or your potions or stuff like that. You still rely on tax revenue, that sort of thing. It's all still there, and it's all still done in that cheesy, silly, fantasy, fairy tale kind of thing, and it's really just remains fun in that sense. But at the same time, they modified it quite a bit. Your heroes can now upgrade, actually, to different classes. For instance, fighters can become paladins or blade masters, depending on what temples you have. Temples have to be built on holy sites now, which is a massive pain because there's very rarely more than one or two holy sites on an entire map. They've made the enemies much, much, much harder to kill. That's mostly because enemies pretty much start out at level 5 and go up from that. But at least it shows you their level now. They nerfed the wizards to where they basically take one hit and they're dead, and their damage output is really nowhere near what it should be. At least I guess they took it as in Majesty 1 as them being a little overpowered, and so they modified it so they're now underpowered, and that's a big pain. But they threw in a cleric class who can heal people instead of just the priestess of Agrella, and you can actually upgrade the cleric into the priestesses of Crypta or Agrella. So all that stuff is still there. They've removed a couple of temples. They've basically simplified a lot of the layout of everything. The interface isn't so intrusive anymore. It's now more of a traditional RTS interface, and it actually works very well. It's in 3D now, so you can alternate the camera however you want to, and that actually helps out pretty well, believe it or not. They put in more reward flags to your disposal. They also decided to add in this system where your heroes can join groups. It's basically like an adventuring party, and you choose party leaders, and then the parties basically form themselves, and they form at ends. And it's actually a pretty handy system, to be honest, because alone the heroes are pretty stupid. I mean, they're completely retarded. They'll literally, I had my warriors sit there and walk directly past the ogre that was destroying my entire town, and just say, "Oh look, it's a pretty flower," or something like that. Or no, wait, they were going to home just because they wanted to rest. It was stupid. It seems like only a couple of the classes will actually fight the enemies off, and that would be the warrior fights off the little weaklings, and then it's just like, whatever. But the ranger will fight pretty much anything, and the cleric will fight pretty much anything. Oddly enough, the cleric, who is supposed to be the healer. But anyway, AI is horrible in this game. That's really what brings it down. It's fairly bug-free, I've noticed, which is a good thing. And really, that's the main problem I have with it, is the AI, because everything else in the game is pretty much the same as it was in Majesty, except about 10 times more difficult. And they actually removed the freeform editor thing that was in Majesty 1, where you could just randomly generate a map right off the bat. Now it's a scenario editor, where you can. It's actually pretty much more like a level editor from most games, and you can just go in and make your own scenarios. And I haven't really fiddled with that yet, but there really aren't that many scenarios available to you right now. The Majesty 2 community is very small, and the community for the original game was small too, but it was still there, and you could actually play online and stuff. But Majesty 2, there's not that many people who play it. I mean, it's a very, very low playing game. But so multiplayer is kind of out of the question there. But really, if you're looking for a game like Majesty, play the first one, because Majesty 2 is not terrible, but it's really for people who played Majesty 1 and were really good at it. Because take the expert and master level difficulties from Majesty 1 and make that basically your normal difficulty in Majesty 2, and that's pretty much what you've got. I mean, I'm still fairly early on in the game. I still haven't managed to beat it, to be honest with you. I haven't beaten the campaign. I've been able to beat a few of the missions, but once I got up to... It starts at beginner and goes to advanced. Advanced missions are really, really difficult, which is weird. I'm not used to that. I'm used to being able to breeze through the beginner and the advanced quests pretty easily. And then the experts start to give me trouble. But this thing is crazy. I mean, you'll have enemies attacking you within the first 2 minutes of the game starting, and before you can even have your settlement ready. So you really have to learn to do things very quickly, and it's almost nothing like the original game in that regard, because it feels more like a StarCraft game, to be honest with you, when you do that. But luckily, it's not like StarCraft. It still is fun. It's just really frustrating at the same time until you get used to it. And once you get used to it, you can have fun with it. But at the same time, newbies are going to be really frustrated with it. Fans of Majesty 1 will probably sit there and be like, what the hell did they do to my Majesty? But it's not a terrible game, but I don't really recommend it over other things, especially the original game. It does get a 3 out of 5, but that still means that it's still not as good as the original game. Just keep that in mind.